We learned in the last lesson that charity can be done badly, but in this lesson we'll actually take it one step further and we'll ask the question, does charity do good? In other words, does charity do harm? Can it be damaging? We agreed, or we came to an understanding, that the goal of charity is to reduce the suffering and increase the well-being of others. And we also came up with a much simpler definition. Can you remember the shorter definition, the simpler one? It's to make the world
a better place.
That's exactly it. We also learned, as we were speaking about earlier, that charity can be done badly. So we mentioned, for example, thinking too small. Charity might be, for example, letting a government off the hook. We learned that charity can be done to enhance a company's reputation in order to get a tax discount rather than to make the world a better place.
Charity from only one person's greed or one person's enthusiasm like CEO activism.
That's very important. I think you are referring to favoritism, perhaps, whereby all of us, Makoto, Chihiro and myself, we all have bias. So for example, if our friend has a charity that is saving hamsters in Sri Lanka and somebody I don't know has a charity saving children in another country, probably our friend's charity will be more appealing, even though saving children is more important than saving hamsters. So this is the assumption. We would like to think, and we do think, that most charities exist to address a problem. And that problem could be to reduce poverty, to prevent abuse of people or animals or the environment, to protect animals, etc. I think we can start off with the assumption that most charities intend to do well. They intend to do good. They have good intentions. So here's a question for you, Chihiro. How can charities make sure they do good?
I think probably they can check by asking the receiver if it's like good.
That's really good. Listening to the people who they want to help. Is this a good idea, for example, or is this the right kind of help? I think that is really important. If you listen to what we call the beneficiaries, the people who receive the charity, here are some steps that charities can take to ensure they do good. First of all, they can take charity serious, because the problems that charity is trying to solve, they're all very serious. Hunger, poverty, the environment. Yet sometimes charity is more of a social event than...
At my old school in Scotland, there was a bake sale for to collect money in return, selling the cakes, and we all went to buy them, but it was not necessary. We knew it was a good thing. We just wanted the cakes.
Yeah, of course. And I shouldn't be overly critical. Charity, whenever it's done with the right heart, should be welcomed and encouraged. But I suppose I'm using that example whereby sometimes people expect charity to be a couple of people on a Sunday afternoon baking a few cakes, and the people don't take it seriously who are buying the cakes either. So at some point people need to be serious about the issues. If the issue is solving hunger in an overseas country, then it needs more than just buying a cake whereby there's a small margin going to that country, for example. So I'm not critical of bake sales. I myself enjoy them, and I love eating cake as well, so I can't be that critical. But charity in general needs to be taken seriously. That's the main point. And of course we must always remember the goal of charity. It's not about us. It's not about how good we feel. It's got to be about improving the well-being of others and making sure that other people suffer less. If that's the goal of charity, then it's not always comfortable. It's not always a feel-good thing. But if we remember that, and it requires self-discipline to do this, otherwise we tend to go off in different directions and we tend to go away from the goal of charity. Do you agree, Chihiro? Have you ever found yourself moving away from the goal of charity in your actions?
In high schools in Japan, We tend to do volunteers for our CVs, which is like going after.
It's true. If your resume or your CV says that you have an interest in tackling some of the world's issues like poverty, hunger, or the environment, it does stand to your character. It does make a statement about who you are. Simply doing good is not the goal. We know that you can do good. Like the cake sale example again, it's doing good. It is doing good. But is it doing the most good? And this is where charities need to ask themselves the very important question. Is this the best I can be doing? And it's a really difficult question to ask because sometimes we're happy just doing good and it's uncomfortable to ask the question. We are all biased. We are all more likely to donate to a charity our friend is involved in. We're more likely to donate after we hear a story of one person rather than hear statistics of millions. We are all more willing to do charity work whereby there's no significant sacrifice. And the book is called Toxic Charity. Toxic is like poison. And according to the man who wrote the book, most charities hurt more than they help. Now, if you worked for a charity, that should be a shocking statement. But let's look at the main argument. The main argument of the book lies in the fact that most charities are giveaway programs and therefore they create dependency. The man who wrote the book encourages charity workers to think more like entrepreneurs. I think most people imagine charities as being very different than business, and charities operate very differently than businesses, but he's encouraging people to take a more entrepreneurial approach. And that is getting closer and closer to the ideal of social enterprise, which is of course what we will be discussing throughout the internship. But let's continue and ask this question. How much money has been spent to date to alleviate world poverty?
A lot.
Exactly, a lot. And world poverty still exists. So that tells us something. It tells us that we're not doing something right. If we're spending a lot of money to solve a problem and it's not being solved, then we're doing something wrong. Can you summarize what you just saw in the video, please, Chihiro, very quickly?
There's an egg farmer in Rwanda and a church tried to help, had the intention to help his area by, and then there became a surplus of eggs, so the farmer had to quit his job because the church sent them.
So it was a good intention by the charity, or the church in this case, to do good, but in the end they put a man out of business. And then what happened later was that the charity moved on. They moved their priorities to another country and stopped providing eggs, and now that community had no egg farmer. They had to buy their eggs from another community because the capacity to produce eggs was removed. So this is an example of charity doing harm. I don't believe anybody had the intention to do harm. It's not about feeling good. It's about doing good. And that means pursuing the goal of charity. So in the book, Toxic Charity, the author, the man who wrote the book, he suggests that everybody working in charity, everybody working for a non-profit organization takes an oath. An oath is like a promise, a commitment. And I'm sure you know that doctors have an oath whereby they commit to doing no harm to their patients. It's called the Hippocratic Oath, and this is similar, except for charities. Number one, never do for others what they have the capacity to do for themselves. So that's the egg farmer in Rwanda. Rwandan farmers had plenty of eggs. They didn't need support for eggs. Limit one-way giving to emergency situations. Of course, it's okay to give without receiving anything if it's an emergency situation. But if somebody is financially independent or has the capacity to become financially independent, giving to them without receiving anything in return could lead to dependency. seek ways to empower. Empower is to give the beneficiaries power through employment, lending, and investing. Number 4, put the interests of the poor above your own self-interest. In other words, remove your bias. At least consider that you are biased and see what problems result because of your bias. Number 5, and Chihiro, you mentioned this at the very beginning, listen closely to those you seek to help, especially what is not being said. Especially what is not being said. That's important. What do you think is meant by that? It might be several reasons. For example, if you run a charity and you live in Japan and you go to a poorer country and you offer help, the dynamic, the power relationship is uneven. You're not coming as an equal. You are entering into a relationship with people whereby you offer help. You don't need help, you're offering help. And they may feel, the beneficiaries, that they cannot tell you this is wrong. They may feel unable to say what they're really thinking. So it's important to understand the culture, their situation, and the dynamic.
I think we should do this because it is related to one, I think, point 1. So the research, what they can do by listening to the people. So I think 1 and 5 is related.
Okay, interesting. And number 6, above all, as a charity, do no harm. It sounds obvious. Does charity do good? Only if it does no harm and makes the world a better place. A lot of charities claim to make the world a better place, but they don't look at the first part. You can only say you're doing good if you're doing no harm. That's where we start in our thinking. If it's doing no harm, then it must be doing some good. Then we apply the goal of charity to make sure it's doing the most good to improve the well-being and reduce the suffering of others. Now we're going to look at some ethical dilemmas. In particular, the area of compensation and salaries is a tricky one for charities. Chihiro, can you imagine why salaries and payment and compensation might be a tricky area for a charity? If you worked for a charity, do you think you would be paid the same as if you worked for example, Dentsu?
No, I don't think so.
Dentsu are a company that are seeking or maximizing profit all the time, and a charity is doing something like solving the world's biggest problems. Which company should the most talented people join?
I think it depends on what talent they have.
Very good answer, actually. So let's take a look at this example. This is a real-life example. This gentleman in the picture is Dan Pallotta. In 1994, he organized the first Californian AIDS ride, which raised $1 million. In 1994, he was the CEO and he was paid $140,000. In 1995, a year later, they had the second California AIDS ride, and this time they raised $3.25 million, so a big increase. And Dan's salary increased too. Dan was paid $322,000 for 1995. Dan's annual salary ranged from $150,000 in 1994 to $425,000 or so in 2002. That's a big jump. Now, probably as a result of the negative publicity attracted by Dan's salary, the main donors stopped supporting Dan's company and he lost his job. The event continued under new management but never raised the same amount of money again. So here's some questions. What do you think, first of all, about Dan's case? Do you think he was paid too much?
It's a bit too much.
If he worked for Dentsu and he received this, would you say the same? No. Interesting, isn't it? Let's ask the question. Do you think low pay in the charity sector affects employee performance?
Well, I thought that employees work harder, like their motivation is to get promoted, which means like earning more money.
If you thought a charity would pay you less than a private company, which would you more likely join? The charity or the private company?
I think I would go for the private company, to be honest.
Most people do, because of course there is a stigma attached to the charity sector. People, at least in my experience, believe that the pay is low and there are less requirements to join. You don't have to be as talented perhaps. But if pay affects employee performance, then how will that affect charities? So here's the second question. Is money the main motivator for performance in general?
It depends on what that person is working for, but generally, I think people work to earn money.
I think people think it's the main motivator, but it isn't necessarily proven in research that money is the main motivator. Sometimes having a sense of purpose can be much more meaningful than money. Let's look at another ethical issue, financial integrity. What is meant by financial integrity? Integrity is when you do the right thing even when nobody is watching. For example, if we represent the children of Malawi, and Makoto does, Makoto Daily represents the children of Malawi in Japan. If he were to be offered huge money by the Yakuza to help the children, and he had some doubts that this money was legal, and perhaps this money came from a drugs deal with North Korea via some kind of pachinko parlor, should Makoto, as the director of a Japanese NPO, accept that money? When Stanford University opened an ethics center, the president of the university asked this question: at what price could a donor change the name of the ethics center? And would the amount of donation depend on the donor's reputation? In other words, does everything have a price? At what price could a donor change the name of the ethics center? So they teach ethics. And if Bill Gates said, I'll give you $1 million, will you call it the Bill Gates Ethics Center? Is that ethical?
Not really.
This is a true story. In 2018, a philanthropist, a man who does charity, Steven Schwartzman, he donated $25 million to his old school. But he asked the school to change its name to the Abington Schwartzman High School. And the community were angry and said the school won't be renamed. But he wants a picture of himself hanging in the school. Is this ethical? Thank you for your money, and we don't want your picture, but if you give 25 million, you want something back, yeah? These are real life ethical questions. I'm going to end today on this quotation. To give away money is an easy matter and in any man's power. But to decide whom to give it and how large and when and for what purpose and how is neither in every man's power nor an easy matter. Aristotle said that, the student of Plato. That's from a long time ago. Giving away money is easy, but doing it right is not easy. And that's what we looked at today.